Welcome to the Sisterhood of Sweat. Today's guest is Lindsey Ellison. Lindsey Ellison is a relationship coach and founder of Start Over Coaching Incorporated, a coaching practice dedicated to helping people navigate their divorce or breakup. Lindsey also specializes in helping people break free from narcissistic abuse and is the author of the best-selling book, Magic Words: How to Get What You Want from a Narcissist. You can find Lindsey on her popular podcast, Unbreakable You. Break up without being broken, on her website, lindseyellison.com. Today we talked about the topic of narcissism, what a narcissist is, the different types of narcissism, gaslighting, what that is and where that actually originated from, the tools a narcissist uses like stonewalling and many other tactics, and how to get your power back and not fall into the vortex of a narcissist if you're in a relationship with one, and how to spot the red flags so you don't wind up in a relationship with them. We also talk about, after the narcissist, how to actually get into a healthy relationship again and not fall back into being a codependent. We talk a little bit about codependency today. So this is quite the episode. Lindsey is usually the top episode on every podcast she's on. So this was very well done, you guys, on this topic. So enjoy. I am super excited to welcome Lindsey Ellison to the show.
Well, hey there. How are you? I'm so glad to be here and join you guys.
Yeah, I am really fortunate to have you on. I've really been diving in and listening to your book and researching this topic of narcissism today. What a way to start out, you guys. Now, I have to laugh because it's like the term is loosely used, maybe a little too much, like, oh, you're so narcissistic. Oh, that person's a narcissist. And so I want to dive into it from the aspect of what is a narcissist, to clear that up for everybody out there in case they're confused.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm glad you said that because it is often an overused term. But there's narcissism and then there's narcissistic personality disorder. So it is a spectrum disorder, and it typically ranges. We can all have narcissism. We can be narcissistic where we're not struggling with a personality disorder. So just think of a sliding scale between 1 to 10, and that's not the clinical diagnosis, but I like to just make it easy, right? Of scale of 1 to 10, where it really starts to become a personality disorder is like the 7 range and higher. In other forms of clinical, there's a 0 to 5 scale, and then codependency is a 0 to -5 scale. So those are the numbers that typically clinicians, when we look at disorders. But where narcissistic personality disorder becomes a problem in a relationship, whether it's through a romantic partnership, a parent, or a coworker, or a boss, is when the person has no accountability, where they do not take responsibility for their actions. And they typically are very, very good at spinning things and turning things around and blaming you for their aggression. And they're masters of projection. And so however they are feeling about themselves, they will project it onto you. And where the dysfunction happens is if you are a codependent, and I'm sure we'll talk about what that means, but if you are a codependent or have codependent tendencies, you will naturally take on their disorder because it's much easier to fix you than it is to fix them. And the reason those relationships tend to stay on and they're very toxic is because we depend on them for something, and they know that, and then they manipulate us. And so they are masters of blaming and being a victim of you. So while really what's going on behind the scenes is they're the aggressor and you're the victim, but they do such a good job, and depending on how long you've been with them, they can really brainwash you into thinking that you're the problem, and making sure that you're the one apologizing and you have to do the work, and that you're the one with mental health problems. And if you have any insecurities, which most of us do, they will find a way to hit you where it hurts and really go after your biggest insecurity. So whether it's a personal thing in terms of how you look, your weight, your ability to keep a job, finances, your mental health. And when you'll really know when you are in a relationship with a narcissist or working with one, and the problems just don't go away, is because they are constantly blaming you, and they do a number of different tools of gaslighting and passive aggression, which come off as so covert that it's very hard to pinpoint the problem. But when the problem starts to really become, you're just seeing it over and over, year after year, month after month, you really know that you're dealing with a narcissist, someone who doesn't ever say, I'm sorry, what can I do to fix this? How can I take accountability?
Let's go over gaslighting for a second for everybody out there. I definitely have been a victim of gaslighting in my lifetime, and I'm sure other people. What are ways, first of all, what is gaslighting, and what are ways we can protect ourselves against it?
Yeah. So gaslighting actually comes from a movie title from the late 1940s, maybe early 50s. I can't remember, but it was a movie called Gaslight. And it was a story about a man and a woman who, he's just this knight in shining armor. And in the beginning, they're this perfect couple. But over time, he ends up making her crazy. And he's doing it on purpose so that she becomes more dependent of him. And he, back then they had gas lights in the attic, and the electricity was run through the gas. And he would go and play with the gas light and flicker the lights. And then she would say, the lights are flickering. And he would say, no, they're not. And so that's really where it comes from, where you're speaking the truth and then they're telling you completely the opposite. And so often it's like, we see it, the best way we can see it is in politics right now. It's a really great example, and I'm not going to get political, but just look at any politician where something happens and then they say it didn't happen, but you're like, but it did. And then, you actually said it. And then they'll say, well, that's not what I really meant. And when you're in a relationship, yeah, I'm just joking, or you're so sensitive, you're overreacting, you're actually becoming hysterical. And so the ultimate thing is you're saying the truth and they're really warping it. And they do such a good job warping it, then you actually start to believe what they're saying, because you've got a choice between wondering whether you're crazy or just believing them. And go ahead.
Do they believe their own stories? How can they do that to a person without having a conscience about it?
Yeah, they do believe it. They do. And so the root of narcissism and codependency, we actually are very similar, codependents and narcissists. It's why we have a magnetic relationship with them in the beginning. But typically, when we're being raised, there is some kind of trauma that's going on. And when I mean trauma, that does not mean you've had to witness a murder for it to be trauma. Our parents getting divorced could be traumatic, or witnessing abuse, or not having enough money, or losing your home, or just something that, what trauma, the way I define it, is actually, it's a memory that is stored in a different part of our brain, not where it's collected in other memories of like that great vacation we had 10 years ago. It's something that we can never, ever forget. And our brains wrap around fear, and we have a survival emotion around trauma. And typically, think of it as a fork in the road between a narcissist and a codependent. We're on the same path. But where the fork happens in terms of the codependent response and the narcissistic response, the codependent will then be raised by their parents they are rewarded for being the pleasing child and to not speak up. So over time, they're rewarded for not really having any boundaries and to be the good kid, the good girl, okay? Where the narcissist is rewarded based on the false sense of self that they have. So let's say it's a guy, and I'm not saying all men are narcissists and women can't be narcissists, but being that your audience is women, the majority of, I would imagine, the situations would be men. So if the guy is the narcissist, he is struggling to be himself, his authentic self. He might be getting picked on. His parents might, one particular parent, typically narcissists become narcissists because they have a father or mother who's a narcissist. And all narcissists see their children as an extension of themselves. So when a narcissist, a budding narcissist, if you will, he will get rewarded for reflecting the ideals of the narcissistic parent. So that's really where they start to get rewarded for their false sense of self. And then typically where it starts to happen is they don't have the tools to have emotional intelligence of how to break down their feelings. And so rather than feeling pain or feeling any conflict, they create a new story. And then what happens is people like us who fall in love with these kinds of guys, we fall in love with their false sense of self, their mask, if you will. But narcissists can't ever uphold it long enough. They're quite exhausted by creating this false sense of self. It's basically hard to lie. And what they will do is, as you start to get to know them, you'll start to call them on their crap, like, hey, you used to be this person and what's wrong? And then that basically is a threat to their false sense of self. Boundaries are a threat to their false sense of self. So what they will typically do, if you argue with them or disagree with them and not go along with whatever story they're saying, they experience what's called a narcissistic injury. They are literally injured. Think of that mask that they're trying to keep getting kind of dented. And they aren't able to, and they're very threatened that it's going to get taken off by you. So what they will do is they will abuse you to keep you from doing that. And they will come up with all different kinds of forms of abuse. So much of it is subtle that we don't even know it's abuse. And that's what I said earlier. They'll attack your most sensitive vulnerability so that you don't do that again. And the older the narcissist is, or the more supply that they're getting from these false stories and this false sense of self, they then become really going into that disorder where they are very grandiose. And they've got to keep their supply by finding new things, new jobs, new money, new hobbies, new women. Everything has to be forms of supply as gasoline to keep that false sense of self going.
Now, how in the world do they keep this from their partners? Because I was reading, many people don't even realize it until they're like 20 years in or some like odd number like that. I think it almost seemed like people they knew something was off, but they didn't know what to call it.
Yeah. Well, that's my story. I met my ex-husband in sophomore year in college. Because they, and I classify him as a covert. There's covert and overt, right? Covert is, think of undercover ops where they really, and they're the hardest ones to really pick up on because they do come off as very empathetic and caring, and covert narcissists can be good parents. They could be good siblings and good children to their own parents. But it's typically when, let's say, your first argument, or when you've got a boundary, any boundary, right? And then they will really, really punish you for speaking up, and you will retreat. And then what they do is they see you retreating, and then they pick up the pieces for you, and they tell you, and they're they're masters at brainwashing. So for instance, for me, it was, I would retreat, and then he would say, Lindsey, nobody loves you the way I love you. I do this for you and this for you. And boy, do they remember all the things that they do for you. So if you were to leave me, you would be making a very critical mistake, and you would be very much on your own, and no one would love you the way I do. So, and again, one of my biggest fears and insecurities, now wasn't aware of that until much later in life, but it was to be abandoned, and I did not want to be abandoned. So he really figured that out early on. And then after the crisis would happen, and then as long as I behaved, then I would be rewarded with the most amazing man, weeks, months, until the next thing happened. So then you just get caught up into this in love cycle, in hate cycle, in love cycle, in hate cycle. And it's very, very hard to break from. Now, if you have children with this person and all of your money is wrapped up, if you do threaten to leave, you've got more invested in this relationship, so they will threaten to make you poor. I will fight you all the way to the bank. I will take the kids. And then, some of these divorces can be really, really awful. So a lot of women who are in these situations feel very much enslaved by their situation. But yeah, you know what? There are red flags early on, and that's kind of some of the stuff I talk about all the time, especially for those who are newly divorced and want to make sure that they're not going to meet another one. There are so many red flags. And really, what is kryptonite to narcissists is self-love, and having a sense of self, and knowing what you require, and knowing what your deal breakers are, and being very, very clear with that up front. They will run from you. Narcissists aren't as strong as we think they are. In fact, all bullies to me are wimps, but they will use their words to show you how strong they are, but you can always, always outsmart them. But the true thing of keeping, to move through this relationship and to get out of it, or to not meet another person, is to really work on yourself. That's the one thing you can do and control. And for me, it was really going back into my childhood and really unraveling the trauma that I had to go through, and forgiving and working through it, and accepting and loving myself for who I am today. And narcissists will never do that. So you've got the opportunity to always get stronger, smarter, and better, where they never will.
They won't work on themselves.
They never will. They
need to, right?
They don't think they do. And that's just the kind of joke. I don't know if it's a joke or it's an expression that I say, where I say, how do you know? People will ask me, how do I know I'm not a narcissist? I said, because you asked if you were. Right? Narcissists don't care. They don't ever self-reflect. And then, however, the covert ones will pretend that they do, to lock you back in, to reel you back in, but they ultimately don't. And if you see this pattern of behavior over and over, and you've gone through counseling, or you've done everything there is to do, that's just a true sign that they will never, ever change. So you will either have to accept it, or you're going to have to move on. And I always recommend moving on.
Wow. That is heavy. What about women out there that maybe in this covert narcissist or overt narcissist type relationship, they've spent their whole lives and their money and finances are so linked up to, the narcissist? Of course, I've done some of my homework, and they many times want you to be dependent upon them.
Yeah.
And they have all the control. What is your advice to women out there that may find themselves in this type of situation? How can they protect themselves?
Well, there's a difference between protecting themselves and getting out of their situation, right? Like, protecting themselves is for anyone newly married, my advice for women is to always be financially financially independent, and to make sure, you're working and you're, because the harder it is to leave a narcissist is when they make a lot more than you do, or you don't make anything, or you've been the homemaker and you've got the kids, but let's just say a lot of women in their, gosh, I'd say 50s come to me, and their kids are either out of the house or they're about to be graduating, or and he does make a lot of money, and he will tell her how it's all his, and that's not true. So it is it's hard to answer that question because there's so many variables based on their situation. But if I could give kind of an umbrella response, it is reprogramming your brain to getting back to where you were before you met him or when you met him. Because typically, and I not only have data to support this, but it's also just based on the years that I've been doing this, we are stronger than they are. We are. And they have reprogrammed and brainwashed us into thinking that we're not. So a lot of that, for me, for instance, it took me 5 years of therapy to rewire my brain to realize that he will not break me if I get out. He will break me if I stay, right? That took me 5 years to do. I had to realize that me being who I always was just pretty much an independent, happy, funny person. I was no longer those things towards the end of the relationship. And I had to go back to being that person. And it's interesting is that the more I was being that person, oh boy, that threatened him so much. And so we would argue more and more and more because I was being the person that he was so threatened by. And, but reading my book too, that's a start, but it's about, I think one of my biggest concerns about reading about narcissism and codependency, and there's a lot of books out there, is to really make sure you're not subscribing to that you're a victim and you're powerless, because that might feel that way, and that might be the position that he's brainwashed you into thinking, but you're actually not. So it's really tapping in and getting the strength to own your life and get it back. So for instance, if you are all tangled up in the finances, you've got to start to take charge. And I think a lot of people are so afraid to do anything for fear of him finding out. But it's being your own investigator and, getting the username and passwords on your financial statements and start collecting that information, working with a financial coach, or there's me, but there's also certified divorce professionals that will help you gather all of your financial stuff, and then finding the right attorney to then go after his money to make sure that he brings it forward. The other thing too is, of course, living in, where you're going to live and getting him out of the house versus you. I mean, there's so many variables there. It's really hard to give an answer, but it's basically, I always say it's like your Rocky moment. Remember Rocky? He was so defeated and so broken down, and he was ready to quit. And then it was mindset. He just said, I'm not going to get defeated. And I always sometimes will just play the Rocky theme song on YouTube of just look what he did. He fought, he got strong, and he was practicing, and it was a daily, I always say, when we have to, and you would appreciate this, you're into fitness, but when we are trying to change our mindset, we are basically breaking the habit of our thinking, which our thinking is, I'm not good enough and I'm defeated. Well, you're not going to get very far if you keep thinking that. So in order to break the habit, it's kind of like when you're going on a diet. You want to lose weight, you want to get into fitness. You could go to the gym once a week. That's not going to do much, because if you're eating the same way every day, you're not going to make a lot of progress. Changing the habit of how you think about your body and what you're going to do with it is a daily practice. And you're going to have to spend an hour or two a day meditating and working with someone who can give you the tools, reading books and empowering yourself. And that is really what I did to get out. I read and read and read. He would come home and I'd go straight to Barnes and Noble, And I was just basically making a plan. And sometimes I didn't even know what plan I was making, but I was in my rocky moment. It took me a few years to do it, but it was basically reprogramming my brain to go, okay, I can do this. And I think that's the best way for kind of the foundation to start any kind of fight that might ensue when you're trying to get out.
You're just making me laugh a little bit because I wrote an article, Have Your Own Rocky Moment. And that's what I did for a fitness routine, was Rocky. So that's near and dear to my heart. So when you're talking about basically being, at your breakdown, but then having your breakthrough, I can really picture it.
Yes. Yeah. And it's possible. I mean, I've helped so many women get out of these situations. But I will tell you where I don't get out. I don't help them. And I will say this when anyone works with me, I said, you're going to work with me, but you're going to have to do the work every day. Right. And you have to know deep down, I call it your pilot light. When the light within you is dark and gloomy, and he's taken away all of that, especially if you've been with someone for this amount of years, you still have your pilot light, which is your spirit, and no one can take that from you. And even when you die, your spirit apparently goes on. That's what I think, right? Your pilot light is what is always on, and no one can take it. So you're going to have to find that and go deep, 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 dig down and know that you can get out, and you're not going to go down without a fight. No one's going to kill you, right? And so when you are in this place, you've got to find a way to read and do these resources and YouTube. I mean, there's so many resources at our fingertips. We just have to find them and listen to podcasts and just get that strength so that you can remember who you are. That's what I always like to say is, he didn't take anything from you. All you did is you just forgot who you are. Just remember.
Now, when a person begins, I think before they leave the relationship, if they're going to leave, they probably start trying to be who they are. Why is a narcissist so threatened by them being who they are?
Okay, so when they first meet you, they are enamored by your strength. They want to be you, and they can't ever be, but they think they can. And that's why typically I always hear from people like, but I used to be outgoing, or I have a really good job, or I'm really successful, or I have all these things. And then suddenly it's just, he's taken that from me. I'm like, well, he did, but you also gave it up, right? We give away our power as well. But they are like barnacles. They are emotional vampires, and they clung on to us because by us being on their arm or on their side, we make them look good. And they think in the moment for a while that they can be this new version of themselves, but ultimately they can't. So they experience shame. And when again, a true narcissist cannot tap into any kind of pain. They don't want to go there. So rather than feeling shame, they will blame you. It empowers them. They feel better. And what they do, there's this exchange going on, is they feel shame, they blame you and put you down. And it's almost as like they're taking your power and they're taking it as their own. But we let them, because we don't realize how amazing we are. We just don't. We forget that part. And when you love someone and you're emotionally attached to them, when someone tells you something that's bad, we tend to believe them, especially if there's hope for working on it, right? And so that's why they're so threatened, because they can't be you. And they feel very, very ashamed and injured by that. So rather than working on that, and again, everyone asks me, well, do they know this is happening? No, they really don't. It's very much on a subconscious level, which is, again, part of the disorder. Does that answer your question?
What?
Does that answer your question?
Yes, that was great. That was great. What about, what are some tools for somebody in the situation, you know, their finances are tied, their children, what are some tools for them to survive, you know, while they're in the situation and not get drawn into this vortex? What are ways they can keep their power?
Right. Great question. So read my book, Magic Words, How to Get What You Want from a Narcissist. That will really help you communicate with them. And you've got to see them with a different lens and not see them as so powerful. I was just instructing a client today about, you got to think of them as, you have to think of yourself as a teacher dealing with a disabled child. So if you were to think about, or, you know, if you're a parent and you look at your children, you don't get down on their level and have a temper tantrum with them. You know that they can't think on a certain level. So you're going to redirect them, and you might have just different ways to communicate. And that's really kind of the premise of my book, is to look at them differently and to speak to them and separate the emotional attachment of powerlessness and get your power back by thinking about them differently and being 2 steps ahead of them. Of course, there's always this no contact advice. I think that's a great piece of advice, but it's very hard to do when you're living with someone or trying to co-parent with them. So it is really about, I like to tell people to almost think of just a force field around you that's protected, and you're going to observe their behavior and not absorb it. And they will do it. They're like woodpeckers. They'll just pop, 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 and they'll get to you to the point where you blow up because you're so angry, and you're going to keep it cool, keep it cool, keep it cool. But then ultimately they will burst that force field so that you have a meltdown. And then you'll notice, if you ever engage with a narcissist, the moment you have the meltdown, they become very calm. And they will do that on purpose to showcase how crazy you are and how unstable you are. So there's that. There's basically the observe, don't absorb technique. There is the walking away. It's talking to them as if they were a disabled child. It's also really, really being brave and taking the steps to get out and to make that plan. And I remember going into his file cabinet and Xeroxing his statements. This is before I think we even had online statements, but and I remember he caught me. Like I think I left one in the copier, like the printer copier, and I think back at that old Lindsey who was so afraid of him. So I wasn't ready for the answer to give him. But what's so interesting is the more I just kept pressing on with my strength, the more it did weaken him. And they don't like to feel weak, but this is why I got into this business, is to coach people, is to really remember that they are a disabled, underdeveloped child. You have to look at them that way. And whatever strength that they are showing you and showing to the world, it's a front. It's not real. It's the Jekyll and Hyde. They're chameleons. And you can, if you're smart enough, outsmart them. And I don't want you to threaten them and make it worse. You're going to look at them differently, and then you're not going to react. You're being proactive in the relationship and not reactive. And that's what they're really good at training us, is to be reactive. You're walking on eggshells. You'd rather just be quiet and not say anything. But when they do say something, you're reacting to it. Rather, you might be walking on eggshells, but you're going to be proactive. So start thinking about and again, my book offers all of the kind of a Q&A approach to really get and understand their fears and insecurities. They're not as complicated as you think. They're all pretty generic. And start writing down, using my book as a guide of what is their persona, what are their fears and insecurities, and then start mapping out all of the places that you are being triggered. And it's pretty much probably 5 to 10 things, just in different scenarios. And then how are you going to plan on not reacting to it the way you have been? It's changing things up.
Why is it a mistake to speak logically and reasonably to a narcissist, trying to make them understand?
Well, it can work in your benefit. I mean, you can speak logically, but I think if the logic is a threat to their false sense of self, then they're going to see logic as a threat and as a trigger for them. So, trying to think of an example. If you're living with this person and you're getting ready for a dinner party and he wants the table set one way and, like a sit down versus a buffet, I'm just kind of making, but that's how arguments start, right? So you're basically presenting logic as to why buffet would be better for whatever reason, but just logic to them in that scenario is threatening their ability to control the situation. So then, if you're trying to offer logic and that's an important thing you're trying to get across, again, think of them as children. You're going to redirect them and give them something else to control. Or if it's not controlled, you're going to compliment them on something that so most narcissists have true mother issues. They did not get unconditional love by their mother or father. And they have been really taught to be loved on certain conditions, the condition that they are X person. So the one way you can really throw them off is, rather than disagreeing with them, is to mother them through the problem. I know it sounds crazy and everyone wants to roll their eyes and vomit, but just the thought of doing that, but it works because you're not threatening them for not taking away power or control. This is why divorce can be so high conflict with someone like this, is because divorce is so basically black and white. It's a legal division of assets, and they get very threatened by the loss of control. And especially when you have another lawyer involved who's representing you, that ultimately divorce will expose this person that they are not the person that they are telling everyone else that they are.
Now, how do they keep this a secret from everyone, people out there, and keep from being exposed? Because I think a lot of the women that I was researching, they felt like when they're leaving their narcissist, how am I going to explain this?
Right. There's two camps. There's his camp and your camp. And what narcissists do is they will reward you for being loyal to them. And should you not be loyal to them, they will make you pay. And that goes across work, politics. You see it. I see it in family dynamics where if you are grown up and you have narcissistic mother, let's say, and there's 3 of you, let's say siblings, the narcissist parent will triangulate. And so they will punish the child who's going against her, the mom, and she will praise and favor and reward the child who does not go against her. And that's how they do it. They will also tell stories about, like, for me, that's exactly what happened to me. I lost a good majority of my friends. He just told absolute lies that he did everything he could to save the marriage. I just up and left. I'm having a midlife crisis. I must be bipolar, and I must be cheating, and I had a very, very good girlfriend who was divorced maybe 6 months ahead of me, and I was relying on her for advice. And I was talking to her so much and doing so much time with her that he accused me of being in a lesbian relationship with her, and told my kids. that I was. And
Oh my gosh.
and it's so the more you threaten how they look to the outside world, the more they will make sure that that won't happen. And that's really hard. I mean, it's like, I lost a lot of, that took me years to get over. I lost a lot of my entire wedding party, my maid of honor, everybody just went with him. And it is a true test to your friendships and who's loyal to you and who isn't. And then I have a couple of friends who were in this whole marital group, and they did not go with him. And now he doesn't invite them to anything. And the rest of our group does. They all do things together, and they've been ostracized from the larger group because they went with me, let's say. And that's something that you've got to evaluate of the cost of freedom. I would never, ever do it any other way, because I got out of that very horrible toxic, like, people to this day do not, if I were to ever share, and they're still friends with him, and I'm sure they also ostracized me for all the books and stuff and podcasts that I've had ever since, because I came out, and I came out big. Yeah. And I'm sure they judged me a lot for that. And, but I don't care, because I would rather work on helping others and getting this information out in the hands of people than holding on to friendships that are asking me to be quiet. So, yeah.
What would you like to say to women out there that may find themselves in the situation you were once in, and they're afraid because they've been broken down, they're exhausted? How are they going to make it? Are they going to be able to leave this narcissist and, be okay?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it goes back to really working on yourself, and there's an expression that I use where the theory of relativity says you cannot be who you are until you have experienced who you are not. This entire relationship has been about who you are not. Now you have to know who you are, and to really get very clear on who you are and not who you are not. And we can very much focus on the lack of what we aren't and what we don't have and what he is or what he isn't. You've got to stay really clear and focusing on what it is that you want. And I remember for me, I was meditating. I don't even think I even knew I was meditating. This is before the word meditating became cool, right? It was just, I remember just journaling and picturing my life once I got out, and what my house looked like, and what that feeling was when I would walk in the door. I would picture being in love again, and having a man kiss me and I liked it and not grossed out by it. About being able to shop wherever I wanted and not get yelled at. So I was basically creating this world. It's the same feeling I like to say to people. It's like when when you plan a vacation, let's say the vacation's 6 months down the road, but you have it booked. Well, you're so excited. You're visualizing what's going to happen that week. You're looking at your room. You're wondering what it feels like to be in that Caribbean water and it's freezing cold at home. Your brain is constantly working on visualizing this vacation. And what happens between vacation and now? Things don't bother you as much because you're like, screw it, I'm going on vacation, right? That's the same mindset. Is you have to visualize and create what it is that you're trying to achieve for yourself. And that when things do happen, you're not going to get rubbed by every little whim that he does or she. And so that's one thing. The other is going deep into your childhood trauma and understanding the fear, okay? And if, let's say, you were told that, let's just say you grew up with money issues and you were terrified of money. Well, leaving a narcissist and there's money attached to that, that's a trigger that's triggering your past. That has nothing to do with him. Like I had mentioned earlier, it's abandonment for me, is that if I leave him, I am not abandoning, I was worried about abandoning him, abandoning my kids. And I had to really redefine that, because I wasn't. I was making a choice for myself that was better for me and my kids. And they were little back then. And I learned that I knew, for me, from what my dad had told me, and it wasn't really until not only therapy, but working with just reading a lot of books, that I learned that my father was a narcissist, and I married my father. And I had to almost release him out of my head. So what I ended up doing is writing down all the things that I was hearing. I always say it was like he was at my boardroom table every time I was trying to make a decision. And so I used to visualize him like firing him and getting him out of my head. There's a lot of visualization techniques that you can use. But one of the things he would say was, Lindsey, you're never happy with anything. That's one thing he would say, is, why do you always have to make everything so difficult? Why can't you just be happy with what you have? And that was a narrative that I kept saying, well, maybe this marriage isn't so bad. You know, maybe it is me, because he would always blame me. So I had to really create my own thoughts. So if you were to really go back and think about your childhood and all the things that were said to you by mom or dad, or things that weren't said, 50% of the problem of this marriage is from your past before this marriage even started. You can work on that, and you can unravel that. And that's really where a coach or therapist can really help you do that.
I guess the biggest thing would be also, once you get out of it, not jumping back into another relationship that's the same.
Well, then there's that, right? Which is exactly what I did. So that's my story. And that and again, I didn't know any of this. This is why I got into this work, because I wanted to tell everybody about what I did. But yeah, like, let's see, I think 8 months separated, I met some guy, and he was literally like my Prince Charming knight in shining armor who would take away all of my pain. And boy, was he just charming. Now, he was an overt narcissist. I mean, the flags were there from day one, but I didn't know any better. I thought he was awesome. And he, and because again, the pattern was of being afraid of being alone, and thinking that I couldn't make it in this thing called life without being with someone all the time. That I remember there were red flags on our first date. And I remember to the point where I texted my girlfriend, what do you think about this, of what he said? And she's like, Lindsey, red flag, run. And I didn't. And because I also made up a story of all the things that he was. And that's, again, the chemistry that we had. It goes from 0 to 80. So when I had to break that pattern after that relationship ended, and that ended out of a significant heartbreak. That was worse than my divorce. I took a huge step back, and I thought, okay, who is Lindsey? What is my voice? What are all the strengths that I bring into this world? Yep, I've got flaws, but I am so sick of focusing on my flaws. They're always going to be there. What is important to me, and what do I require? And I think that is something that, again, was such an indicative telltale sign of my childhood, is that I wasn't allowed to require anything. And when I would ask for things growing up, my dad would always tell me I was so needy, and ladies don't do that. Ladies sit back. Ladies sit back and wait, and are given, you should be happy with what has been given to you. And I had to redefine that and say, no, I'm giving myself permission to demand these things. So when dating, once I finally figured it out and mastered it, I took it very, very slow. I asked a lot of questions. I always say dating is an interviewing process. There is no kissing. There is no going back to each other's place until you have fully vetted them into being a nice person. And the more you make them work, the good guys will stay, the bad guys will run because it's just too difficult for them.
Too much for them.
Yeah.
Wow. And, I guess finding someone that fans your flames instead of douses them would be, what are the red flags? You kept talking about red flags. Let's leave everybody today with the red flags they could watch out for and spot.
Okay, so there's definitely this grandiosity that they have. So you can always look at their social media accounts. How active are they on it? Do they love to just get likes? Are they always on it? And a lot of selfies, a lot of photos of their kids, just like. How many accounts do they have? Are they active on Twitter, Instagram? I mean, especially for men, that's a really big red flag. I'm remarried, and my husband like hates social media. I mean, he's on it, but he's like, I don't need that. I'm cool. Like, I got this thing called life without needing all those likes. Looking at the amount of friends that they have and what of that group are really good friends. What's the relationship like with their ex-wives? That's a big one. Is it a good co-parenting situation, or does that ex-wife absolutely hate them and will do anything to make sure he does not have access to the kids? Red flag for me, number one, that I completely missed. Talking about their exes way too soon. So if they're talking about, and especially in a negative way, my ex this, my ex that, calling her names, red flag, because especially if he has children, you don't want him speaking. Like, I would never speak about my ex that way to someone who I've never met. And it was only if I really, really knew you. Otherwise, I would say that conversation's off the table for now, right? Just wouldn't do that. Speaking about exes and that in a grandiose way of like, well, she wanted me, but I dumped her, and kind of just in a kind of an arrogant way. Looking at their stuff. How much stuff do they have? Are they in every hobby and they have to have a kayak and the golf cart in their garage? And how much time are they spending on their hobbies? Looking at their cars and their things. Typically, narcissists, they're always looking for new supply, and they can never have enough because it's like a bottomless pit. And the thing that they have can never last long enough. So they always have to go buy new things. When you are dating them, and when they start to say things about your life about your life with them too soon, like I could totally picture us going on vacation together, telling you they want to go on vacation with you, talking about you meeting the kids too soon, where they're not willing to slow things down. So narcissists, again, they're in desperate need of supply. It is gasoline to this false sense of self. So they will want to move very, very quickly. It gives them that high, and it's a high for you because you're like, this is fun, right? But you need to slow it down. And if you start to say, hey, I need to slow things down, or hey, I'm not ready for that, or I would like the guy I was talking about. I mean, he started sexting me like after the second date. I'm not into that at all. And unless I'm in a committed relationship with someone, and that's your private business, right? But I remember saying to him that was not okay with me. And he said, oh, I'm so sorry, but then he did it again. And I ignored it. So they typically are that's another thing is it doesn't mean that this is wrong, but they're very much into their bodies, working out, and looking their absolute perfection, their best. And on the one hand, they're like, oh, great, look, this person, they're really into themselves and what they care about their health. But if you see that they don't have a balance to that, just balance in general, if it's just too much of everything, that's a red flag. So I think too, as you start to get into a relationship with them and you start to have, let's say, rules, boundaries, and if you're finding that they just don't listen, for instance, hey, I'm a really punctual person. If you're going to be late, could you just at least let me know, right? And if they just keep ignoring them, that is an enormous red flag that they're going to ignore any rule. And they're going to think it's okay to cheat on you or to lie to you. And as long as you let them slide and you don't really give them a consequence for breaking a rule, they're going to keep doing it. And then you're going to get really hurt.
Oh my goodness, my goodness.
I know you're
what is the discard phase? I was reading about that. I didn't quite understand it. They discard you, or they just kind of...
There's two. They will respond in two different ways. They will discard you without warning, and they will go find someone else that gives them far more supply, or they will keep you around as plan B. They'll always have you as plan B. And I've experienced both, and I was discarded. Like what happened was I had caught him, I guess, cheating. I mean, I kind of caught him and he was having a whole other life in a different state and was dating. And when I caught him, he really just said, yeah, you caught me. Like, he didn't even deny it. And that was actually kind of a form of gaslighting. Like, well, Lindsey, what's wrong with that? Like, what do you expect me to do when I'm in a different state? I'm like, I don't know, be loyal. Yeah.
Well, what would he want you to do?
But we never had that conversation about an open relationship or anything like that. So, so once I said, well, that's not okay with me, it was just done. Like it's this kind of master, there's just ghosting. They just don't talk to you and there is no closure. And that's one of the hardest things when I went from 1 minute having like what I thought was the love of my life, and there's so much love and dopamine going off in my brain, to getting completely cut off, that I went into really active withdrawal, and it was very, very hard. Versus my ex-husband, who never discarded me. He found his way of getting, it all depends on their personality, but it's, what they do is they keep you around. They want to make sure that they can puppeteer you and control you, and that you're apologizing, especially for men who really like to portray that they're this white picket fence dad, and any kind of divorce or any kind of break from that would really make their environment question this persona that they're so trying to keep up with, kind of the keeping up with the Joneses, where others don't care. It really depends on what their personas are and their fears and insecurities. And the discarding, I think, is typically happens in a newer relationship. And that's hard because you're like, I was dating him and everything was going great 2-3 months. And then they find someone better, or they find someone else, or they're going to tell you all these amazing things. Like, we're so perfect. I mean, I was told, like, we're so perfect together. And I could see one day us getting married and I can't wait for us to meet the kids. And you're thinking, okay, we're like moving on and having a life together. And then they are doing that full knowing that that is not the case, but you're there to keep them there. You're on the hook so they can keep fishing. And once they found somebody else, they'll just cut bait.
And the one thing, that we didn't bring up, but I found it to be in everything I've read about narcissism, is stonewalling.
Oh, yeah.
Now, why do they use that tactic, and how can we kind of gird ourselves up against it?
Again, it's just another form of manipulation and control. So stonewalling is, I think, pretty self-explanatory. It's they put up a stone wall and they won't talk to you for days, weeks. or they'll answer, yes or no. I mean, there's no communication at all. And it's really hard if you're living with this person. And it's really designed to break you down and for you to just come back and apologize, and for you to lower your to lower your defenses, and for you to come back as a weaker person so that they can then accept you and manipulate you more. The reason why they stonewall is because they think of it as an injury they're protecting themselves. They don't see it that way, but they're doing it because you really crossed the line with them over something, and they don't want to deal with it and they don't want to handle it. So they put up a stone wall, and then that's ultimately designed for you to, nobody likes to be, it's kind of like isolation. And I mean, I remember, I think the longest I went not speaking to him, my ex-husband, was right, months leading up to me saying I wanted a divorce, but it was 2 or 3 weeks of literally not speaking to each other at all. And it happened on Christmas Eve, where I was buying too many presents for my little kids and he didn't want me to. Now his fear and insecurity is money. So I basically bought the presents anyway, wrapped them and put them under the tree. And he stonewalled me for 2 or 3 weeks after that, just like that. And in the beginning, you don't care, but the more they're good at it, it's really hard to parent children when no one's talking to each other. So you ultimately go in there with a Hail Mary, like, I'm so sorry, or a white flag. And you basically are negotiating your changed behavior, and they don't. That's what happens.
Is there any hope for them to change?
No.
That's not. Mm-mm.
No.
Okay. So that's what people really need to know.
Again, if you're nodding your head yes to all these things that I'm talking about, and you really look at this is a disorder, and you've tried to work on things and nothing's happening, and they're never taking accountability, no, they can't. And the older that they get, I find the disorder to become even more and more warped and powerful, especially if they're successful in their lives. Now, I have seen many men, I've worked with many men whose wives called them narcissists, and they came to me thinking that they were. Interestingly enough, they weren't, because they came to me looking for help, right? Now, we can all be narcissistic. Interestingly, I think over the years, having been divorced from him, I do think I have some more narcissistic tendencies, because I've learned from the best. And that's somehow been my way of fighting him, is you basically, I enact the same tools that he has put on me. And I call it mirroring, is that's a technique you can use. And then I don't care what the responses are. So I always check in with myself. I'm like, that was a very narcissistic move. Like, I did something and then I don't care. So, it's always this balance of, am I narcissistic, or am I just an empowered woman that doesn't take crap from anybody anymore? I don't know, And I mean, just look at it, like, women who empower are looked as, bitchy ladies, but a man who's in power is seen as strong, right? And there's labels.
Total double standard.
Yeah, I think that being able to have empathy with people, and to, if you're still able to have empathy when someone's hurting, and where you could come to them and say, I really screwed up, I'm really sorry, or I don't know why I did that, or, I'm looking into that, then you're not a narcissist. That's really how you know.
A true narcissist will never reflect to see if they are a narcissist.
No, and I've been co-parenting with this person for 10 years now. And I mean, every week it's amazing. Like, his relationship with his boys, my boys are 17 and 14, and it's very much, deteriorated. I mean, it's been real, and he has done all of that on his own. And I have done everything I could to help the boys have a relationship, to help my kids explain this is who he is. He doesn't help, he can't, he does love those kids. He really does, but he just can't get out of his own way. And you know, just the other day I was chatting with him about, I mean, he'll come to me asking for help. He always does that. And then help, meaning he wants me to solve his problems, which we got to be careful about in a co-parenting relationship. Typically we will want to, they will reward us for doing so. But instead I put it back on him. I'm like, this is about you. I've been talking to you about this for years. I think you could really go I think he suffers from an anxiety disorder, and if he were to be medicated, it would solve 50% of his problems. Just go talk to someone, and he never will. Then in the email right back, he's blaming the kids for something or blaming me for something. Blame. And they are always the victim of their entire environment, and they want you to help them out and solve their problems.
Well, you can never fix a problem you don't admit. I learned that a long time ago.
Very true. Very true.
Well, this has been so enlightening today, and you're quite the expert on this subject. I'm sorry that you had to learn it the hard way. Like, that's probably how everybody learns it. Where can everybody reach you and get your coaching? And, you know, if somebody really is struggling with some narcissistic abuse, let's give them some help and some resources today.
Sure. So lindseyellison.com. I also have an online self-paced course that is perfect, that answers so many of your questions, that helps you get that strength and understanding of how to break free from a narcissist. So my website there is breakfreefromyournarcissist.com. It's also connected on my Lindsey Ellison site. I also have a book. It's out on Amazon, and that's a great tool that you can use to help communicate with your narcissist while you're kind of in this state of crisis, or even if you have to co-parent. And that's called Magic Words: How to Get What You Want from a Narcissist.
It's a great book, you guys. It's a great book.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on and help share all of this educational stuff, because it's so important.
And I really appreciate you coming on today, and just want to acknowledge you so much for all that you've been through and how you're helping other women to overcome such a hard thing today.
Thank you. Thank you. And everyone can get strong. Just remember who you are.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening today to the Sisterhood of Sweat.